All right, so we're moving into our second session here, and you've probably worked out that we are dealing with this in three separate tranches, basically. And Peter probably defined it better than I will, but I'm too much of a gentleman to repeat what Peter said. But we basically had our three statesmen as the opening session. Next session is the current leaders, and then the final session is the three leaders. And the thing that you'll see that is different about this is that the gender is changing as we actually move through these stratas. And so I'm going to introduce the three speakers now in this session. The first speaker is Lisa Nichol. I met Lisa, maybe 8 years ago, I guess. I came here in 2009 and we had a DIAC. It was pretty moribund. DIAC was the Development Industry Advisory Committee. And I decided that we were going to reconstitute the DIAC and we were going to do something completely different. We were going to have 50% of it male and 50% of it female, and we were going to have a female as our chair of the Development Industry Advisory Committee. So I consulted, as all males do, with the other two males that I knew pretty well and said, I know both you blokes are up to the job, but who would you select if it was a female? And Lisa was the one that got the unanimous nod. And so Lisa became the chair of the DIAC, and I can tell you the reconstitution, the curriculum review of the MLPD program that realigned the program from one where you could almost do advanced basket weaving and be given the degree to one where there was a clear statement of core knowledge and core competencies, and these were well aligned with what the industry was looking for. Lisa was our partner in making that happen. So full marks to you for that, Lisa. Now, Lisa runs her own project management company in Houston. She'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Jonathan Brinston, as I said to you, first guy I actually met down here because he had some connection with ULI and I'd come from Washington, DC. Looked him up, said, mate, I'd like to talk to you. He said, yeah, sure, come on down. We're opening this project of ours. Why don't you come down for the grand opening? So I made the mistake of saying yes. I went down, two of us got completely sloshed. Jonathan said, he says, you can't drive back to College Station in this state. And I said, oh, I'm Australian, mate, I can do anything. And he said, oh, no. So he puts me up in their new Hotel Sorella down there and I go to bed. And then at about 5:30 the next morning, I opened the door, it's Jonathan Brinston. He says, you all right? I said, yeah, I'm good, mate. And so we went down, had breakfast, and we've been good mates ever since. And the thing that you need to know about Jonathan is that he's just recently been appointed as chairman of ULI Americas. You may not think that is a big thing, but I can tell you that is huge. For 2 years, he's going to have leadership over the largest and most influential association that covers all professional real estate activities and is basically the leader in best practice. Now his leadership will drive not only the Americas, and I can say this because I was once the Vice President of Global Development at ULI, his leadership will have impact across the globe. So you've got an Aggie now well positioned to actually transform the world, and I have every doubt that Jonathan will do that. Third person is Peter Barnhart. Well, he's not really the third person, he's the third character. Peter I met around about the same time as Jonathan. He scared me to death when I first looked at him. I thought he looked like Lex Luthor. And I clearly was not Superman, so I thought, yeah, I can feel the kryptonite coming on here. I'm not allowed to tell you this, but he's actually a bit of a softie. He's a really nice guy. And Peter's come up many times to actually come and assess our students' work. He's always been there when I've asked him to actually help students with projects or to prepare advice. And in the times when the program's been under extreme duress, Peter has always been there to basically assist us, as have all three of the members of the panel. So without further ado, let me invite Lisa Nichols to the rostrum.
It was an honor to have been asked to be part of this distinguished panel of Aggies, but I'm especially grateful to share this segment with my friends and colleagues, Jonathan and Peter. I know Peter's worried because we were classmates actually in the MLPD program, that I have a bunch of things to say about him. I do have things to say about him, but Jonathan was one of the first speakers. He's a couple years ahead of us, one of the first speakers who came and presented at Rita. So that was in '94, and ever since, these two guys have constantly given back to A&M. And since I'm going first, I'm going to say nice things about Peter and Jonathan. They're great guys. I have the utmost respect for them, and not so much just for the long list of accomplishments they both have, but much more so for the leadership they provide, their selfless service, and their strength of character. So I thank you for asking me to be part of this. You know, as mentioned, Jeffrey said we could talk about anything we wanted and what was most important to us. So I think it's not a coincidence that you're going to hear some common themes. He also sent a 90-page Vision 2020 document with the email, which I thoroughly read. And as I was reading through it, you know, there are a lot of great imperatives, and a lot of hard work's been done to try to elevate A&M to be one of the 10 best public institutions. But there was something I came across, a quote, a task force quote, that resonated here more so than it did here. And I think things that resonate in your heart are the more powerful things. The quote was, "The most uniquely defining characteristic of Texas A&M University, the quintessential difference between Texas A&M and other great public institutions, is the role of traditions in perpetuating the Aggie spirit." And as Fred mentioned, the Aggie spirit is our value system that goes along with the other education we receive here. It's excellence, it's pride in who we are, what we do, hard work, dedication to one another. It's integrity. Aggies live by the Aggie Code of Ethics, honesty, integrity, morality. We do not lie, cheat, or steal. It's leadership, and leadership is something that's instilled in each one of us, no matter what form of leadership that takes in our lives. It's loyalty. The Corps of Cadets motto is through unity, strength. We're part of a family. We're part of something bigger. It's respect for one another. It's inclusiveness. It's selfless service. And it's an optimism and faith in the future. It's a can-do attitude. I remember a few years ago when I was touring universities, when I was in high school, with a couple other friends. These two friends and I, we toured two other universities first. And when I set foot on A&M, I knew. The ambassador who greeted us with a howdy, and every single student, each professor I met, they invoked in me, they stirred inside of me something. I knew I wanted to be part of what was here, that specialness of A&M, what sets it apart. I wanted to be part of something bigger. And even later, I started in general studies, didn't know what I wanted to do. So after my first year here, I started visiting with professors of different departments, trying to determine what route I would take. And I met Rodney Hall, and he absolutely embodies that Aggie spirit, that internal light, that enthusiasm, that engaging attitude. And that's why I got into environmental design, and then later into MSLD. Every step of my life, there's been something like that where I've drawn to that spark, that spirit, that thing that sets us apart. So I talk about those things because I think that other education, that spirit, is especially helpful in the field of land development. Two things about land development. One, it's really hard. And often the harder it is, the more rewarding it'll be. Every project is different. So each time you kind of build on past experiences, try to put a plan into place, which almost never goes according to plan. And there's almost always something that comes up that you didn't expect. So you've got to adjust. You've got to have that optimism. Steve Jobs said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do." And I know my friends who aren't Aggies have often referred to us Aggies as crazy, and I think it's a good kind of crazy. It's the kind of crazy that makes you eternally optimistic. No matter how many times you fall down, you're able to get back up because you have faith in the future. The second thing about development is that it's multidisciplinary. Not one person alone can achieve a land development project. It's also what's so fun and exciting about land development. You work with experts in all different kinds of fields, from design, construction, legal, environmental, marketing. And so being able to be part of a team, to embrace the team, to be able to empower one another, to have a common sense of passion and purpose, that's where you achieve the greatest results. So I just encourage you while you're here at A&M to embrace that Aggie spirit, to embrace the other education here, and to foster relationships with everyone you know, everyone in this room. Because just like these two guys, 25 years later, we're still colleagues and able to work together. The next thing I wanted to talk about, since I'm one of a few females on this panel, is the perspective of a female being in an industry that's largely male-dominated. And some of these things I'm going to talk about, I felt more early in my career, where not only was I the only female often in a room, but often the youngest person. So like Tom said, I'm going to say it a little bit differently. Whenever there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. And so our way to achieve things is steer challenges towards opportunities, to train your mind toward the positive side of things. So some of the challenges, especially like I said earlier in my career, and this doesn't just apply to women, it's to everybody. Anytime you feel that you're the only one, or you're different or something, these are some things that I think are tips and advice or ways to approach it. First, like I mentioned, it can be intimidating to be the only female or the youngest person in a meeting. How you turn that into an opportunity is to develop your confidence. Confidence is believing yourself and acting that way. So for me, I tried really hard to always be prepared. It's going back to the Aggie value of excellence. It's doing the work, it's doing the homework, coming prepared. It doesn't mean I need to come with all the answers. What would be the point of a meeting if I thought I had all the answers? Plus, if I thought I was the smartest person in the room, I'd definitely be in the wrong room. So just develop your confidence. It can be a quiet confidence. It can be your own type of confidence, but develop it. And then I'd say actively engage. Don't be intimidated. We all have different things we can bring to the table, and so be willing to actively engage. Another challenge might be in networking. You know, someone mentioned hunting trips or doing things like that. And while I have been invited on some of those things, I've declined. One, because I don't like doing those things. Two, I think it would be awkward. And then three, I kind of like a separation. And this is I'm talking about more early in my career when contractors would try to invite you to do things. And and I don't want any vendor or contractor ever think I owe them something. What they owe me is a quality job, on time, on budget. That's it. And so it kind of gave me a way to back off from some of those things that might not have been appropriate. To counter that, to turn it into an opportunity, is to try to find other avenues for networking. So getting involved in ULI, not just attending things, but actively participating, different things in the industry that would introduce you to more people, to bridge gaps and make connections. So those are some of the things, and I was really lucky in my career to have mentors who encouraged that. When I first started, I tried really hard to focus on my job, to gain the knowledge, the technical skills. And at some point, a boss pulled me aside and said, "Lisa, pick your head up, now get out there and start growing your personal strength." So that was really good advice, and I was able to do that because they supported me in that. A third challenge is work-life balance, and this isn't just a challenge for females. I know it's a challenge for my friends here. To address this, I think the first thing you need to know are what your values are. And then you need to assign your time, your energy, and priorities in alignment with those values. You know, I've had to learn to say what things I'm going to say yes to, and a lot more of the things I'm going to say no to. And I know there's different phases of life where life can get really busy. I think I'm in a busy one right now, so I've had to say no to some opportunities that I would have loved to pursue. But that's okay, because it's going to be a blink of an eye before my children are older, and so right now my value is to be with them. And I've been able to do that because the first maybe 15 years of my life, I worked with really great companies that hired smart people, that engaged the brightest consultants, that believed in us and wanted to grow us in our personal strength. And so I learned a whole lot. I worked really hard in those. I made relationships. And then in 2011, when I started my company, I started working on marketing and brochures and did all these things. But really what ended up happening is through word of mouth, I found opportunities, and I've had some great opportunities. I really love the clients I have, the people with whom I work. It's just turned out really well, but I attributed it to that kind of focus in the early part of my career of being in a position where I was constantly learning and being exposed to new ideas and having mentors who supported me and wanted me to get out and build my personal strength in the industry. So other characteristics or opportunities for each of us, not just women, but maybe some of these things women may be a little bit more inclined to, so I hope I don't offend anyone, but one, I think it's optimism. And I mentioned all of us Aggies are kind of already bent that way. That's why we were drawn to this university. But optimism is a connection to confidence. And so if you can just steer your mind toward optimism and positive thoughts, I think that really helps. The second thing is having passion and purpose. Men and women alike have this, but women, just know who you are and what's meaningful to you, and establish your values, know your values, establish your priorities. The second thing is to be authentic. You don't need to try to behave like other people do. You need to try to behave like yourself. Early in my career, when I was responsible for a large project's business plan, we had these very stressful day-long meetings when the executive team would come into town, and my team and I would prepare, but I was the one responsible for giving our results and presenting our plan going forward. And there was this one guy who just loved to try to rattle my cage, and so he'd throw out some barb in the middle of my presentation to try to just see if he could get a rise out of me, I guess. And during a break, my boss said to me, you need to jab back. You need to put him in his place. You can do it. That's what you need to do. And that just didn't sit well with me. I was like, that's not how I was raised. That's not me. That's not it. So instead, next time he did something like that, I'd just say thank you, and I'd continue on my way and not let it bother me. So my point here is to be true to yourself. Find your own style, your own voice. Don't let others try to tell you you have to behave differently. The female perspective. So I'm not an expert on this, but I've read that men tend to think more with the left side of their brain, which is very goal-oriented, very linear. We're going to go from point A to point B. Here's how we're going to do it. And women's brains tend to go back and forth more. Maybe it makes it a little harder to make decisions. But I think if we can train our brains to utilize that, leverage it, to be able to maybe see variations, different options, and all of us can do this, so it's not exclusive to women. Maybe we can see that there's a point C that's a better goal than a point A. So I think each of us brings our own unique skills and values to a team. Another thing would be that I think women tend to be more encouraging and nurturing. There was a quote from Maya Angelou: people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so I think it's an asset to be able to be more nurturing, encouraging, to be friendly, to let people lower their defenses. Another example, early in my career, I was a project manager. I was still in my 20s, and we officed on site. And I had the first inspection on one of our water, sewer, and drainage projects. And the county inspector was going to issue a red tag. So he asked the contractors, who's the recipient of this red tag? And they were all very happy to say, she is, and she's officing right over there, so you can take it to her personally. So into my office marches the inspector with his red tag and an entourage of contractors, just dying to see how the girl in the office was going to respond. And like Fred said, I took accountability. I said, I am so sorry. What can I do to fix this? How can I avoid this in the future? And as soon as I was friendly and took responsibility, all of these men, the contractors, they're like, oh, no, don't worry, Miss Lisa, we got your back. We're going to help you. We're going to take care of this. And I think in every situation, I try to be friendly and think about the people I'm working with, how to make them feel comfortable, encouraged, nurtured, respected, and valued. Another little quote on that point is that management is about arranging and telling. Leadership is about nurturing and enhancing, and that was by Tom Peters. One last thing is this soft communication skill of empathy, and I think Tom talked about this, and Fred probably did too. Empathy is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding from where they come. What is a win for them? How can we find something that's a win-win? Sometimes we think it has to be financially motivated, but there's so many other things that could be a win for someone else. So if we can hone our skills to actively listen, to genuinely care about other people, to take the time to hear their point of view, often we're able to work together toward a better solution that might be a totally different outcome than we've expected. So how am I doing on time? I've already exceeded it. So anyways, I just so happy for y'all to get to be here at A&M. I hope you embrace the Aggie spirit and that you take forth in your future that specialness that we all have for being here. Thank you so much for your time.
Howdy. Howdy. Great job. I was petrified to go after Lisa, and now I'm more petrified than I thought I was going to be. So, and notice one of the things she was saying about male and females and their approaches. All the guys have PowerPoints. Lisa just did a beautiful and eloquent job without one PowerPoint. So, but it's been really fun growing up with the two of them. And Peter and I actually had lunch the other day, and we're just catching up. And you know, we were going to talk about what we were going to talk about, and then we didn't talk about anything about what we were going to talk about. We just but Peter and I were fraternity brothers, and we were laughing. We said, you know, if people had seen the two of us in the fraternity house, they would have pretty much unanimously agreed we would amount to nothing. It was, but anyway, so it's a lot of fun. So what I wanted to talk to you today a little bit is about purpose. And I think as Lisa said and others, there's no coincidence. There's going to be probably a lot of overlap in terms of what we're talking about. But and what I'm going to do, at the risk of sort of really sounding like I'm just talking about myself, I'm going to share a little bit with you about my journey and sort of why certain things happened and how they informed where I am today and what I believe today. And I think, you know, in many ways, we're the sum total of the people that have influenced us in our experiences, both good and bad. And so I love this quote from Richard Branson: great businesses are places where problems are solved and lives are improved. And I think, you know, you got that from Fred. Where did Fred disappear to? Did he? Oh, there he is. But I think my sport game's pretty good, but Fred wins today. Right on. So I'll talk a little bit about my story. I came here in 1987. Growing up, I loved two things: cars and buildings. I rebuilt a number of cars in high school. So my dream was actually to go to automotive design school, and thought folks like John DeLorean were really cool until he got busted for drug trafficking. But y'all are probably like, I don't know what he's talking about. That was a long time ago. But I started in mechanical engineering, and after my first year, I had a 3.2. Unfortunately, that was the sum of my first two semesters. 1.6, 1.6. At least I was consistent. So I met with the counselor. She said, you know, this is not looking like your thing. My dad said, grades or Peace Corps, your choice. And so I actually thought that maybe following my passion for an interest in design would be a better route, and I switched to architecture, environmental design. And how many ED majors or former ED majors in the room? Not many. Okay. Here's what I'll tell you about your degree. Don't look at it as just a degree in architecture. When I look back on it, it's one of the greatest gifts, and it's one of creative problem solving. The idea that someone gives you a problem, there's no set answer, you have to go figure it out, and then not only do you have to figure it out, you have to sit there and present it, and then proceed to get berated by people telling you how bad your answer is, right? For any of those who have sat through design reviews. And in some ways, business is a little bit like that, right? You have ideas, you have a passion, you want to go accomplish something, you try to raise capital, and everyone will tell you that it's a terrible idea until you find that one person that says, okay, I believe you, I'll invest with you. So was very fortunate. A professor towards the end of my architecture program said, you are one of the best problem solvers I've ever met, but you will never be a great architect. I thought, okay, that was kind of a compliment and then a slam at the same time. But he said, no, he said, we have this real estate program. And he said, actually, I think that's what you should think about. And then coincidentally, I had a construction internship, went off to El Paso for the summer, and the construction company was owned by a development company. And it was that window into that aha moment, is to say, that's what I really want to do. And I think I can be good at that. And so it wasn't called the MLPD program. What was it called then? MSLD. So many acronyms. And again, you know, a truly fantastic life experience, and a big part of what I have become today. In 1994, so I graduated on a Wednesday, got married on a Saturday, went on a honeymoon, started work the following Monday. advice, take a break in there somewhere between all of that. That's like 3 really big life experiences, within 10 days. Don't do that. The only thing I'd tell you about marriage is life is better played as a team sport, and if you can find the right partner, it makes life great. And I've certainly been blessed in that regard. And I'll try not to get choked up. You already saw the video of me crying on stage once, so I'll try to avoid that again. But, what I would tell you is they're your romantic partner, they're your financial partner, sometimes they're your business partner, they're your child-raising partner, all of which you will have up and downs in your life. It's not a matter of if, it's when, and that's better to get through life with your life partner. So choose wisely. So when I came out of school, all excited to be a real estate developer, I went and interviewed with Hines and Trammell Crow and all the big names, and they all laughed at me and said, do you understand what's happened in the real estate market? We just built way too much office, all the banks failed, we've had an oil bust, and nobody's building anything. And so I thought, well, that's not very exciting. Offered property management jobs, didn't really want to do that. And so a gentleman in my church named Dow Ham said, hey, I've heard you're looking for a job in development. He said, I've been through the 80s, and unfortunately I had to lay most people off. He said, I've kept a number of assets, got a new project, and why don't you come try it with me? And so interesting conversations with my wife. She was working in Austin. She had graduated a year ahead of me. She really hoped I was going to get a job in Austin, and I always say I knew she loved me when I said, you're going to have to move back to Houston after we get married. And so it was a great opportunity because it was literally he and I, and we worked together closely, and I sort of learned the business from the ground up. What seemed like a lot of different crazy things at the time actually informed a lot of what I'm passionate about today. And so in 7 years did an office building, did a residential community, did 6 hotels, did a shopping center, and a lot of interesting things. He in many ways was a mentor, but at the same time taught me probably one of the most valuable lessons. And I was president of the company when I decided to do something else. We'd hired, I think, 6 or 7 other people. And what I came to realize was he and I didn't share the same values. And what you will all come to appreciate is you can't be 2 different or 3 different people in your life. You're the same person all the time, right? Your personal values, you can't check them at the door when you come to work. They're still your values, and you have to share a common set of values with the people you work with. And so I shared with them that I was thinking about leaving, and during that time, 4 years later, we'd had our first son, and I would tell you, I think to this day there's been no greater powerful feeling that has overcome my body than having your first child. And you will all witness that and understand it, but your life fundamentally changes forever at that moment. And so in 2001, actually in late 2000, the first person I call and say, I'm going to leave Ham Corporation, and not really sure how to do this. I've been a principal at a young age. Can't really do it, I don't think, by myself yet, but I want to go somewhere where I have a similar opportunity. And the first person said, I've been waiting for this call. I know exactly who you need to call, and his name's Brad Friels. And so I'm thinking, right, this is, that's how it's going to work, right? Sure enough, Brad Friels calls. He and I have breakfast, and we hit it off, and that started about a 90-day negotiation. And at the end of 2000, I had essentially agreed to go work with Brad at Midway. But I told Brad, I said, look, I have 2 hotels under construction, and I've committed to the bank and the partners that I will not leave before I finish them. And so if this is going to work, you're going to have to wait till I finish. And as you might imagine from what you know about Brad, he totally appreciated that and understood it and says, I understand, you should go finish those. And so So I went to my wife and I said, look, I've worked out this deal, pretty excited about going to work for this new company. She said, what are you getting paid? I said, half. She said, hell no. And so I talked her through the process and the opportunity, and finally she came around. And what you have to understand is in the midst of that discussion, she was pregnant with our second child. We were building a second house. And so, you know, the idea of less money and maybe more instability was not at the top of her list at that point. So long story short, I finished the hotels in April. They opened on a Friday. I started work at Midway on a Monday. And my job was really, the company had grown up as an industrial build-to-suit, business park and industrial build-to-suit developer. And Brad really wanted to diversify the company, and that was my job. And so one of the great relationships I brought with me was a relationship with Marriott. So from about April to probably June or July, we had put together 6 hotel deals. And so I was very excited about the progress, very excited about what was happening, kept communicating to my wife to assure her this was great, all going as planned. And then what happens in late 2001? It's on the screen, 9/11. And guess what? The hospitality industry is destroyed. So I go back to my wife, and we're having a discussion, and she says, so let's just recap here. You took less money, we just had a child, we just moved house, and now everything you've worked on has been put on hold. And I was like, exactly, you've got it. And yeah, she's thinking, I have not chosen wisely in this marriage game. And so, but we stuck with it, and actually, so we ended up developing a number of things, corporate headquarters, and it really worked out fine. So one of the great opportunities, though, was in 2004, and we had the opportunity to buy what was the Old Town and Country Mall in Houston, and at the time we just thought it was a great piece of real estate. But what ultimately became City Center was my baby for a pretty long period of time, until we ultimately delivered that project. One thing that happened along the way was I begun to feel like the company was not positioned correctly to leverage what, if City Center worked, which most people thought it wouldn't, by the way. Fred will remember, everybody thought we were insane. And so, you know, if it worked, how were we going to leverage it, you know, into more opportunities? And I just felt like we sort of weren't there yet. The way Midway was structured, it was very siloed, and if you looked at a brochure of 2 different groups that didn't even look the same. And I was sort of guilty of, I had my group, and I was very focused on what I did, and that's how I got compensated, and I really didn't care about the rest of it. And then my wife's sister Mary, who I was close to, passed away in 2007 from breast cancer. And I remember thinking, you know, what could I do to celebrate her life? And here we go again. This is like clockwork. And she was, just as everybody talked about, she was a champion of people. And I thought, if there's an opportunity here to celebrate her and sort of figure out maybe how do we parlay this opportunity for Midway, that it's really about thinking about how do we make this better for everybody, just not for me personally. So I went to Brad in late 2007 and said, I have an idea about reorganizing the company. And I titled it One Team, One Midway. And it was sort of a shift in the way we operated. And in typical Brad fashion, I never forget this, so he's listening, we're having breakfast, and I get to the end of it sort of like, you know, wanting the great feedback, like this is a great idea, and he's like, I don't want to do that. I was like, what do you mean you don't want to do that? This is really good. And he goes, no, you don't understand. He goes, we should do it. I don't want to do it. I want you to do it. And so it was sort of the reward, right, for thinking about how do we make this thing better for other people. And so in 2008, we did the reorganization. I actually became Chief Operating Officer. And I'll tell you, in all of this, I have really never cared about what my title is, and I've never cared or asked for a raise in 25 years. I think those things are a result of, right, doing great work, working hard, and being willing to look out for other people. So, City Center opens in the worst market you could possibly imagine in the global financial crisis. And in that period, probably from 2009 to 10, I have never worked so hard to feel like I accomplished nothing. We thought we were the weak financial link in the project. We had 2 banks fail and an institutional equity partner fail, right? Going into it, you wouldn't have thought Citibank somehow was not going to be around at some juncture. And so, but we kept at it, and we worked hard, and we pushed. The team did an amazing job, and ultimately, today it's there, it's successful, and it's made a big difference. And so, also in typical Brad fashion, he and I are on the plane. I think we were coming back from New York, and he's reading a newspaper, and I'm sitting next to him, and he drops the newspaper, he looks at me, and he says, and this is like mid-December, and he goes, "Hey, by the way, January 1, you're going to be CEO," and puts his paper back up. And I'm like, "We should probably talk about this, right?" And he's like, "No, I've decided." And that was it. It was like, okay, very good. And but his point, he was very kind about it. He said, "Look, you've been doing the job. You should have the title." And again, I really didn't care. And you know what I've come to believe is my job as CEO is to care for 150 people and their families. That's it. It's nothing more fancy. But at the time, I can tell you, or at times, that somewhat is a daunting thing to do. So, and the hardest thing, I think, and I'll just be candid with you, is there are times when you feel you're not good enough for them, that you're not doing a good enough job for all the people you're responsible for. So in this process, and this gets back to purpose, similar to what Fred said, part of the reorganization was this. And my thought was going back to my experience with Ham Corporation and why I left, that we fundamentally should build a company around purpose and values, and that we should be unapologetic about stating what we believe. And so we actually created this little book called What We Believe. And it's about as simple as it gets, and we won all kinds of marketing awards for this, which shocked us at the time. And similar to Fred, it's, you know, our purpose is to create enduring investments in remarkable places that enrich people's lives. And today we get up every day and do that. We have a very defined set of values, really very much, and there's no surprise we have a lot of Aggies in our company. And people accuse us of only hiring Aggies, but I think there is absolutely a common bond in terms of values are important to us. So our integrity, passion, adaptability, quality, initiative, teamwork, and generosity. And we didn't actually come up with those. We had a company meeting. I think we had 150 Post-it notes on the wall at one point. And how I framed the question to our team was to say, what do you want in your teammates? What are the values you hold dear, and what do you want from your teammates? And today, the central backbone of our hiring process is values. We ask people to write about those values and what they mean to them personally and professionally. And I can tell you, we can weed out a candidate, and I can read about 2 of those and know whether they're reciting the dictionary or it's central to who they are. So following our purpose and values from 2007 and the reorganization, we went from $250 million capital base to $2 billion today, and from 20 people to 150 people, with another $1.5 billion in the pipeline. And look, the measure is not money, but what I'm proud of is we've built a team of unbelievable people. I mean, and I'll talk about this at the end, but think about this. You spend more time with the people you work with than you do your own family, right? And it never fails. Every time I say that, that sounds insane and completely backwards, right? If you want to talk about life balance, why is that the norm? But it's reality. So going to work every day is a lot more enjoyable if you go to work with people you like, that you enjoy working with, and share your values. So what I'm also really proud of, and what the team's accomplished, is while there's that asset base and that dollar amount, it's the fact that all of these projects have made a difference and an impact in the community. And, you know, that's our goal. Making money and having a positive impact are not mutually exclusive ideas, right? And in fact, I think they're absolutely self-informing. So I'll talk to you a little bit about something I've personally struggled with, and Lisa talked about work-life balance. And I'll be totally transparent with you. When someone walks into my office and says, I'd like to talk to you about work-life balance, I'm like, oh, shit. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, here we go. But, so I think you start, right, always focusing on yourself. What's your, you know, what are you trying to accomplish in your personal life? And then you start your professional career. And what am I trying to accomplish? And Lisa and Fred, and I think everybody said it, at some point you just need to make some money, right? I mean, you got kids, you got a house, you got, you know, that is important. And then I think the more you get involved, you sort of, there's this public aspect to your life. And certainly for those of us that feel like, right, to whom much is given, much is expected. And if you have been given a great opportunity, then how do you give back? And for a long time, I struggled with the balance of trying to keep these things in their own lanes, right? And what I discovered was they're not all different things. No different than I talked about. Your values are your values, right? They apply personally and professionally. They apply to every aspect of your life. And so if you want to think about purpose and impact, I completely changed my reference point and said, this is really how my life works. And it is absolutely true today. And, you know, take a board seat on whether it's Buffalo Bayou Partnership or Search Homeless Services, things I'm passionate about, but they absolutely inform my professional life, right? Does it make the community better? Absolutely. Or my city better? Does that make my own personal life better? Absolutely. And so it's been one of the great gifts to sort of understand that all these things are actually interrelated, mutually supporting, and they are part of who I am and sort of my purpose on sort of how do I use my God-given talents to make a difference. So, Tom covered this first and foremost. Here's some things for you to think about. And I think Fred said it right. You are going to enter your professional lives probably in a really challenging environment. And I'm not sure it'll get less challenging. It's probably going to get more challenged. So, rate of change, constant, and only happening faster, right? And we're in the real estate business, we're in a capital-intensive fixed asset business, right? And so how do we remain adaptable, right? Really important. Obsolescence, Tom and I were talking about this. So in Houston in particular, I think 60% of the Class A building stock was built in the 80s, right? Nobody's come to grips with the reality of a lot of those buildings actually may be completely obsolete at this point. And what do we do with them? Right? Huge challenge, but as Tom said, that's also what? Right. Potentially a really great opportunity if you can figure out what is the next opportunity. Democratization of capital, this is an interesting one, and there's people all over the board as to how this works, but I think there are opportunities where as pension funds reduce over time, about 98% of the investing populations, only two investing options are basically public securities and bonds. And so, you know, how can things like crowdfunding actually democratize the way people invest, especially in other countries? Flexibility in term, number one thing we see from tenants today is people want more flexibility, shorter term, right? That's different than how the real estate business was built, which is give me a long-term lease, let's look at your credit and let's value the asset, right? Totally different. Climate change, whether you like it or not, political persuasion, whatever it is, climate change is happening and it could radically transform the earth. And just from an investing standpoint, it could actually make places irrelevant. And so it will be something, if we don't figure out how to deal with our carbon footprint, it will be a huge problem. And ultimately, I think there will be more global instability, not less. And so you have challenges ahead of you. So I'll close with, first and foremost, and you can sort of think about these as finding your own purpose, but find your passion, right? It's sort of the cliche, do something you love. I am blessed that I get up every day and do something I love. And so work hard, right? It's worth the effort to find something you love doing. Find people who believe what you believe, both in terms of your values and how to go about things, and hopefully share your passion. Get involved, as we talked about. I didn't talk a lot about ULI, but ULI has been one of the great gifts for me. And similar to Lisa, I spent the first 7 years of my career with my head down and then figured, this is a people business. I should have a network. And ULI was that place. And for me, it's not only a place to meet people, but it was actually also the place where I found people who believed what I believed. That was sort of when they talk about finding my tribe. ULI has always been my tribe. Work hard. I don't care what anybody tells you, and you can talk about work-life balance. If you think you're going to go work 9 to 5 and build a career and it's all going to be, fun, it's not, right? It takes hard work. I've worked plus or minus 60 hours a week my entire life. But, that never sacrificed anything else in my life either. And so I don't tell you that to sort of like wear a badge like, I'm a badass because I work 60 hours a week. But I'm lucky, I get to dedicate that time doing something I love, hopefully impacting other people and making a difference. Be an industry leader, right? You can't be in the industry if you're not willing to participate. And so get involved. And last, and I think Fred and everybody talked about it, never stop learning, right? And it goes right back to one of the first things I said, which is rate of change. The world is constantly evolving, and you're going to have to keep learning to keep up with it. So with that, I'll end with a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. The greatest gift life has to offer is the opportunity to work hard at work worth doing. So thank you.
Howdy. So Jonathan's last slide stole kind of the summary of my whole thing, so we can just end right now. I think he actually went a little over on time too, but it's all right. It's all good. And actually when Jonathan and I were at lunch the other day, I think the word that came up when we were talking about our lives in colleges is how did a couple knuckleheads like us, end up where we were? I mean, and we were knuckleheads, and a lot of the students out there in the audience probably have a similar story. So quick thank you to a lot of the Caldwell team that came here to be here today. My wife is sitting back there, been putting up with me for 25 years. Fred and Susan for giving me this opportunity 19 years ago. Fred Caldwell is to me like he's a great mix of a big brother and a dad. And there's some real conflict in that because brothers beat each other up sometimes, but you have to have respect for your dad. So thank you, Fred, for that. So I'm going to get really profound. It's going to not be quite as deep as some of these others, but there you go. Never grow up. I mean, I'm dead serious when I say this too. I mean, your life as a child was simple, and the more simple you can make your life as you grow up, the better off you will be. And Jonathan said it great, and it's one of my points too. Is as a kid, what did you love to do? What were you really passionate about? I mean, I knew it. I knew it innately from the time I was a little kid, and that's a special gift that not a lot of us get. I loved to build things. I mean, from the time I was a kid, I was tearing things up or building things or tearing it down, and I mean, it drove my parents nuts. I had the sawing the coffee table one time in the middle of the living room because I just wanted to work the saw. So I knew that, and so I chose an educational path that I knew was going to help me build on that. I started in construction, and still today, one of my favorite things in my career is setting foot on a job site, putting on a hard hat, and walking through a building or a house, or that smell of fresh cut lumber just winds me up. Okay. Don't take yourself too seriously. You ever see the way kids play with each other? They're not serious about it. They don't have any preconceived notions of what fun is. They don't hold a lot of grudges against each other. They take joy in that moment, in that situation. Children they do that. And, don't sweat the small stuff because most of it is small stuff. Be joyful in the moment. Instead of, when you get to hold your mom's hand while she's going through chemo, be joyful. My kids have heard this one so many times, they get tired of it. But no fun before the work is done. My kids have heard me say that 100 times at least. And the key point on that is fun. Because life is fun. Have fun with your kids. Have fun with your friends. Do fun things. But you got to get your work done first. It's responsibility. We all have responsibilities. You have chores as a kid. You have the responsibility of providing for your family, and that's important. Play Fortnite with your kids. Who would have known that this old man has a victory royale? Keep it simple. You guys ever heard of Occam's razor? Anybody ever heard of that? What Occam's razor is? It was a scientific precept that was come up by a theologian in the 14th century, Charles Occam. And it's basic. It's like, when you're solving a problem or you've got a problem to solve, the simplest solution is 95% of the time it's the best. It's basically what Einstein used to develop the theory of relativity. That was his whole basis of what he came up with, one of the most profound scientific discoveries of our modern age. Fred has a saying that I love. It's I didn't coin it, but I use it all the time. It's we need Big Chief tablet, Fisher-Price motif. I want it simple. Just easy to understand. People understand easy. And one of Fred's mentors used to tell him on contracts, he said, write contracts like a jury of 12 people that had an 8th grade education can understand. Write simply, speak plainly. Plain talk is easily understood. So next, reading and relationships. And this has been hit in a bunch of different ways by different people up here, but it's important. My daughter told me this one time. I don't know where she got it from, but I just always thought it was a great quote, and I've used it many times in talks I've given over the years. And it is so true. And you do become, who you hang out with and what you're reading is going to define who you are as a person. So think about that right now, students, where you are. Who are you hanging out with? Where are those people going in life? What kind of dreams and visions do they have? Does that sync up with where you're headed? Adults, who are you hanging out with? What are you reading? Are you reading? Are you growing? And this kind of, another one that I've heard from my daughter too is show me your friends and I'll show you your future. I think I actually probably had to remind her of that one. A couple times when she was heading down a path of maybe not making the right friend choices. And just a redirect for her. But, I can also look back on my life and some people I was hanging out with, probably not the best influences. And you look at the paths you started to head down, they're not good. They're not good. Jonathan, for instance, look. Bad influence. It's so funny. People really don't change, do they? They really don't. It's like we were knuckleheads, but I think both of us knew that we worked hard and we had to drive to succeed. Lisa's always been one of the most tender people I've ever known on this planet, and still is. She don't want to pick a fight, which is great. That's what I love about you, Lisa. So I read the Bible every morning. So every morning I get up, most mornings, I say not every morning, but it's a ritual of mine. Didn't used to do that. My gosh, I'm far from ever used to do that. And what I've created is a stack of journals right now that, one day I'm going to die and my kids are going to be rummaging through my stuff. And I hope they're fighting over that stack of journals that'll probably fill up a couple shelves by the time I die, if I'm lucky enough, and not over, grandma's china cabinet. So I think that'll probably be something that they'll want to read through. And I've left them little nuggets along the way to keep them interested in reading it. Little things about them that they're going to read through and they're like, oh, that was when Dad was, oh yeah. So it's a good rhythm for me. I'd highly recommend it. back to just books you read, and Jonathan, everyone's really kind of talked about that. I mean, I do not know a single person in our profession or someone I look up to from a leadership and an integrity standpoint that isn't a really well-read person. And when you sit down, they're talking about the last book that they read and why this is a good book and why you ought to pick it up and why there's 14 books sitting on my nightstand right now that I'm struggling to get through. Say you're sorry. This goes back to kind of being a kid. You know, say you're sorry. You've done something wrong. There is something so curing about saying you're sorry. I messed up. I shouldn't have said that. Sorry I hurt you. Hanging on to unforgiveness will rot your soul. If there's one thing I could leave with today, I hope every single person in this room thinks about that statement and they think about someone that they're at odds with in this room. One person. Think of one person. Pick up the phone and call them. Say you're sorry. And last is leave a legacy. You ever heard of this one? Anybody heard say givers gain and takers lose? Man, I've found that so true in this world. And there's an interesting thing there's different types of givers. Okay, so there's a true giver that gives with no expectation whatsoever of anything coming back to them. That's a true giver. And what that person gets is a truly freeing spirit. It actually, I mean, science has shown that it actually produces dopamine in your brain, which is what they've figured out in social media that keeps you clicking like, right? Makes you feel good. True giving makes you feel good. There's another type of giver, and that's a trader. So a trader is who gives something and they feel like something should come back. That's not really giving. And then there's the takers in the world. We all know who the takers are. And takers, at some point in time, their conscience, confronts them with being a taker. Unless you're a psychopath and you just keep taking. But givers gain and takers lose. The world is run by the people that show up, and there's a lot of discussion about that today too, and that's so true. I heard that term initially from a guy that worked for Walt Mischer in Houston, Texas, and many of you don't know who Walt Mischer was, but he's a famous developer. Developed a lot of Houston for 50, 60 years, and that was his saying. And the world is run by the people that show up. Fred called me the other day and asked me to do something. I was like, oh my gosh, you know what I got on my schedule? And he said, yeah, I know. I think he told me. He said, my senior year when I was playing football, I had a lot on my schedule too. And I'm not one to usually say no. In fact, I'm usually to the opposite. My wife will tell you that. I'll say yes to the point where I start doing something poorly, and that's not good either. That's not healthy. If you can't do something well, then don't do it. Say no. But don't say no just because you might have a little extra time on the weekend. If it's really important and it's going to make a difference in someone's life or this world, say yes and show up. And finally, and this is the fun part, and I can't believe I'm standing up on stage talking to people, talking about leaving a legacy and paying it forward. But you can do that in any stage of your life. Students, when you're out there, volunteering at your church, in youth group, there's a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids that would love to hear about your wisdom. And to them, you're wise. You're wise beyond your years. They're like, holy cow, he's been to college. Adopt a big brother. I did that in college. That was a great experience. Or a little brother, sorry. Be a little brother to a kid who has had none of the opportunities that you've had sitting here and pour into their life. Do what Jeffrey's done with these students. Students, if you guys have a question as to whether or not Jeffrey Booth cares for you guys, put that out of your mind. You are front and center to him, and he is great at growing people and caring for people. Thank you.
Okay, so we find ourselves in the same situation, basically.
I tried to hurry up.
Now, what you'll learn is that when you get to my age, and Tom was the one that clued me into this, reminded me, is you deliberately run out the clock so that you don't get any questions, right? It's a very cunning strategy. The fact of the matter is these people had some really important things to say to you. So what I'm going to say to you again is, if you've got questions for any of these people, please email me. It's gbooth@tamu.edu. If you're going to text me, that's cool too, but give me your name. The number of people that text me and all I've got is a telephone number, sometimes I know who these people are, sometimes I don't. So if you're going to text me, put your name on it, because when I bump it on to whoever you want to ask the question of, I want them to know that you asked the question and that they can get back to you, all right? So, and if you want to text me, my cell phone number is 979 393 8111.